It was supposed to be a perfect summer day. A crowded baseball stadium, the sound of cheering fans, and a mother's laughter as she watched her son wave his foam finger in excitement. But in the blink of an eye, he was gone. No witnesses, no leads, just a haunting emptiness that consumed her life. 14 years later, while sorting through an old box of photos, she finds something chilling. A face in the background of a picture that shouldn't be there. A face she thought she'd never see again. The sun blazed high over the city of Charleston, casting a golden glow on the bustling baseball stadium. It was the kind of day that felt alive with possibility, where the air buzzed with the scent of popcorn, hot dogs, and freshly cut grass. Families filled the stands, their laughter and chatter blending with the announcer's booming voice and the crack of bats hitting balls. Among the crowd was Claire Matthews, a single mother in her early 30s with her 6-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was a bundle of energy, his small frame bouncing in his seat as he waved a foam finger almost as big as he was. His bright blue eyes sparkled with excitement, and his messy blonde hair stuck to his forehead from the heat. Claire couldn't help but smile as she watched him. It had been a tough year. Divorce, financial struggles, and the constant weight of raising a child on her own. But today, none of that mattered. Today was about Ethan, about giving him a memory he'd cherish forever. "Mom, look, it's the mascot," Ethan squealed, pointing toward the field where a giant, goofy-looking bear danced to the crowd's delight. Claire laughed, snapping a quick photo of her son with her old Polaroid camera. "Stay here, buddy. I'm going to grab us some drinks," she said, ruffling his hair. Ethan nodded, too engrossed in the game to protest. Claire made her way through the crowded aisles, weaving between fans holding trays of nachos and oversized sodas. The line at the concession stand was long, and she tapped her foot impatiently, glancing back toward their seats every few seconds. She could still see Ethan, his foam finger waving in the air as he cheered, but when she returned, balancing 2 cups of lemonade, her heart stopped. The seat was empty. At first, she thought he had simply moved to get a better view. "Ethan," she called, scanning the rows around her. No response. Her voice grew louder, more frantic. "Ethan, where are you?" The people around her began to notice her panic. A man in a baseball cap turned to her. "Is everything okay?" "My son, he was right here," Claire stammered, her voice trembling. "He's gone." The man stood up, looking around. "Maybe he went to the bathroom." Claire's stomach churned. Ethan never wandered off without telling her. He was cautious, always, holding her hand in crowds. Something was wrong. She ran to the nearest security guard, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "My son, he's missing. He was in his seat and now he's gone." The guard's face turned serious. "What's his name? What does he look like?" "Ethan. He's 6 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. He's wearing a red t-shirt with a baseball on it and jeans." The guard radioed for assistance, and within minutes, the stadium was on high alert. Announcements were made over the loudspeakers, and staff began searching every corner of the venue. Claire's heart pounded as she ran through the aisles, calling Ethan's name until her voice was hoarse. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the now empty stadium. The police arrived, questioning Claire and reviewing security footage. But there was nothing, no sign of Ethan leaving his seat, no suspicious activity, no leads. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Claire sat on the cold concrete steps, clutching the foam finger Ethan had left behind. Tears streamed down her face as the reality sank in. Her son was gone, and she had no idea where to start looking. The days that followed were a blur of missing person posters, interviews with the media, and sleepless nights. The police did everything they could, but as weeks turned into months, the trail went cold. Friends and family tried to comfort Claire, but their words felt hollow. How could she move on when a piece of her heart was missing? 14 years later, the pain hadn't faded. Claire had learned to live with the emptiness, but the questions still haunted her. Where had Ethan gone? Was he still alive? And if he was, why hadn't he come back to her? She had no answers until the day she found the photo. It was a rainy afternoon, and Claire was sorting through an old box of memories in her attic. The Polaroid camera she had used that day at the stadium sat on top, dusty and forgotten. She picked it up, her fingers trembling, and pulled out the stack of photos. Inside, one by one, she flipped through them, her heart aching as she saw Ethan's smiling face. But then she froze. In the background of one photo, just behind Ethan, was a man. He was partially obscured by the crowd, but his face was clear enough to send a chill down her spine. She had seen that face before, and she knew, deep in her gut, that this man was connected to Ethan's disappearance. Claire's hands shook as she stared at the photo, her mind racing. Who was he? Why was he there? And most importantly, what did he know about her son? For the first time in years, Claire felt a spark of hope and fear. The mystery that had consumed her life was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Claire sat frozen in the dim light of her attic, the old Polaroid trembling in her hands. The man's face in the background of the photo was hauntingly familiar, though she couldn't immediately place where she had seen him before. His expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed not on the game, not on the crowd, but on Ethan. It was as if he had been watching her son, waiting for something. Her heart raced as she leaned closer to the photo, trying to make out more details. The man was wearing a dark jacket, his face partially shadowed by a baseball cap. Behind him, the crowd blurred into a sea of indistinct faces, but his stood out with chilling clarity. Claire's mind reeled. How had she not noticed him before? She had looked at these photos countless times in the days after Ethan's disappearance, searching for anything that might help the investigation. But back then, she had been too consumed by grief and panic to see what was right in front of her. Now, 14 years later, the photo felt like a lifeline. Claire grabbed her phone and snapped a picture of the Polaroid, zooming in on the man's face. She opened a search engine and typed, "How to identify someone from a photo." The results were overwhelming. Facial recognition tools, private investigators, online forums. She didn't know where to start, but she knew she couldn't do this alone. Her first call was to Detective Mark Hensley, the lead investigator on Ethan's case all those years ago. Mark had been kind and thorough, but as the months turned into years, even he had been forced to move on. Claire hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, but she still had his number saved in her phone. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Detective Hensley." "Mark, it's Claire Matthews," she said, her voice shaking. I found something, a photo. I think it's a clue about Ethan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Claire," he said gently, "it's been 14 years. Are you sure it's something new?" "I'm sure," she insisted. "There's a man in the background of one of the photos I took that day. He's watching Ethan. I don't know who he is, but I need your help to find out." Mark sighed. "Okay, send me the photo and I'll take a look. But Claire, you need to prepare yourself. This might not lead anywhere." "I know," she said, though her heart refused to believe it. After hanging up, Claire sent the photo to Mark and sat staring at her phone, willing it to buzz with a response. Minutes felt like hours as she replayed the day of Ethan's disappearance in her mind. She remembered the way he had laughed at the mascot, the way he had waved his foam finger, the way he had looked back at her one last time before she left to get drinks. And now she remembered something else, a fleeting moment she had dismissed at the time. As she had walked toward the concession stand, she had felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She had turned around, scanning the crowd, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Now she wondered if it had been him, the man in the photo. Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Mark. "I see what you mean. I'll run this through our system and see if we get a match. It might take a few days. Hang tight. A few days." Claire didn't know how she was going to survive the wait. She spent the time poring over every detail of the photo, searching for anything else that might be a clue. The man's jacket had a small logo on the chest, but it was too blurry to make out. She tried enhancing the image on her computer, but the resolution was too low. Frustrated, she turned to the internet, joining forums for missing persons and amateur sleuths. One night, as she scrolled through a thread about cold cases, she came across a post that made her heart stop. Does anyone recognize this man? He was seen near a missing child in 2009. The post included a grainy photo of a man who looked eerily similar to the one in her Polaroid. The angle was different, and the quality was poor, but the baseball cap and the intense gaze were unmistakable. The post was from a woman named Linda, whose daughter had disappeared from a park in Texas just a year after Ethan. Claire's hands shook as she typed a reply. "I think I've seen this man before. My son disappeared in 2008, and he was in a photo I took that day. Can we talk?" Minutes later, Linda responded, "Yes. Please call me." Claire dialed the number Linda had provided, her heart pounding. The woman answered on the first ring. "Claire?" Linda's voice was strained, filled with the same desperation Claire had felt for years. "Yes," Claire said. "I saw your post. I think we're looking for the same man." Linda took a shaky breath. "I've been trying to find him for years. He was seen near the Code playground where my daughter disappeared. The police said it was a coincidence, but I never believed them. Do you have any idea who he is?" "No," Claire admitted, "but I sent his photo to a detective. He's running it through their system. Maybe we'll get a match." For the first time in years, Claire felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this. Someone else had seen the man, had felt the same gut-wrenching fear and determination to find answers. As the days passed, Claire and Linda stayed in constant contact, sharing every detail they could remember about their children's disappearances. They pieced together a timeline, noting similarities and patterns. Both children had vanished in crowded places. Both had been near this man. Then, one evening, Claire's phone rang. It was Mark. "We got a hit," he said. "The man in our photo. His name is Richard Hale. He's been linked to several missing persons cases across the country. But here's the thing, Claire, he's still out there." Claire's blood ran cold. The man who had haunted her for 14 years wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was still out there, and he might still have answers about Ethan, and now she was determined to find him. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the phone, Mark's words echoing in her mind. He's still out there. For 14 years, she had lived in a fog of grief and unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, she had a name. Richard Hale. The man in the photo wasn't just a shadow in the background anymore. He was real, and he was the key to finding Ethan. "Do you know where he is?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated. "We don't have an exact location, but we've tracked him to a small town in Montana. He's been living off the grid using different aliases." "Claire, I need you to understand something. This man is dangerous. He's been connected to multiple missing persons cases, but we've never had enough evidence to arrest him. If you're thinking of doing anything—" "I'm not waiting," Claire interrupted, her voice firm. "I've waited 14 years, Mark. I'm not sitting back while he disappears again." "Claire, listen to me," Mark said, his tone urgent. "I'll send a team to investigate. Let us handle this. You can't go after him on your own." But Claire had already made up her mind. She thanked Mark, hung up the phone, and began packing a bag. She didn't tell Linda what she was planning. She didn't want to drag her into something so dangerous, but she promised to keep her updated. That night, Claire booked a one-way ticket to Montana. The flight was long, and Claire spent most of it staring out the window, her mind racing. She had printed out the photo of Richard Hale and tucked it into her bag, along with a notebook filled with every detail she and Linda had pieced together. The timeline of disappearances, the locations, the patterns, it all pointed to one man. When the plane landed, Claire rented a car and drove to the small town Mark had mentioned. It was a quiet, unassuming place, surrounded by dense forests and snow-capped mountains. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stood out. Claire checked into a modest motel on the edge of town, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The next morning, she began her search. Armed with the photo of Richard Hale, Claire visited diners, gas stations, and local shops, showing the picture to anyone who would look. Most people shook their heads, saying they didn't recognize him. But then, at a small hardware store, an older man behind the counter squinted at the photo and frowned. "Yeah, I've seen him," the man said, his voice gruff. "Goes by the name Rick. Lives in a cabin up in the woods about 10 miles out of town. Keeps to himself. Why are you looking for him?" Claire's heart raced. "He's an old friend," she lied. "I've been trying to track him down for years." The man gave her directions to the cabin, and Claire thanked him, her hands shaking as she walked back to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the map the man had drawn. This was it. She was closer to answers than she had ever been, but as she drove toward the cabin, the weight of what she was doing began to sink in. What if Richard Hale was dangerous? What if he hurt her? Or worse? And what if she found out something she wasn't ready to hear? The road to the cabin was rough and overgrown, winding through dense trees that seemed to close in around her. When she finally reached the clearing, she saw it. A small, weathered cabin with a rusted truck parked out front. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Claire parked her car a short distance away and approached the cabin on foot, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched the photo of Richard Hale in one hand and her phone in the other, ready to call Mark if things went wrong. As she reached the porch, the door creaked open and a man stepped out. It was him. Richard Hale looked older than he had in the photo, his face lined with age and his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating and piercing. He stared at Claire, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Claire's throat went dry. She held up the photo, her hand trembling. "I need to talk to you about my son, Ethan Matthews. He disappeared 14 years ago and you were there. You were at the stadium." For a moment, Richard didn't move. Then slowly, he stepped onto the porch, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You were in the photo," Claire insisted, her voice rising. "You were watching him. I know you were involved. Please, just tell me where he is." Richard's expression darkened. "You need to leave," he said, his tone sharp. "Now." But Claire didn't move. "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth," she said, her voice shaking. "If you know anything about what happened to my son, you owe me that much." For a long moment, Richard stared at her, his jaw clenched. Then, to her surprise, he sighed and stepped back into the cabin. "Wait here," he said. Claire's heart raced as she stood on the porch, her mind spinning with possibilities. Was he going to tell her the truth? Or was this a trap? When Richard returned, he was holding a small, worn notebook. He handed it to Claire without a word. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "It's everything I know," Richard said, his voice low. "About your son, about the others. I didn't take them, but I know who did." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" Richard's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something that looked like regret. "They call him the Shepherd?" he said. "And if you want to find your son, you'll have to find him first." Claire's hands tightened around the notebook as a chill ran down her spine. The shepherd. The name sent a wave of fear through her, but also a spark of hope. The hunt wasn't over, it was just beginning. Claire sat in her motel room, the notebook Richard Hale had given her spread open on the small table. The pages were filled with scrawled notes, dates, and locations, all written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. Some of the entries were barely legible, but one word appeared over and over again: the shepherd. The name sent a chill down her spine. Who was this person? Why had Richard been tracking him? And most importantly, what did he have to do with Ethan? Claire flipped through the notebook, piecing together what she could. The entries spanned nearly 2 decades, detailing disappearances from all over the country. Each case was eerily similar. Children vanishing in crowded places, no witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Richard had written about his suspicions, his theories, and his failed attempts to confront the shepherd. One entry stood out: June 14th, 2015. Saw him again. Same pattern, watching the kids, blending into the crowd. He's careful, but I know. It's him. Followed him to a storage facility outside Denver. Lost him there. Need to go back, but it's too dangerous alone. Claire's heart pounded as she read the words. A storage facility. Could it still be connected to the shepherd? She grabbed her phone and called Mark. "Claire," he answered, his voice cautious. "What's going on? Did you find anything?" "I found everything," she said, her voice trembling. "Richard gave me a notebook. It's full of information about someone called the Shepherd. He's connected to Ethan's disappearance and so many others." Mark was silent for a moment. "The Shepherd," he repeated. "I've heard that name before. It's come up in a few cold cases, but we've never been able to link it to anyone specific. Claire, this is big. You need to let us handle it." "I can't just sit here, Mark," Claire said. "There's a lead in the notebook, a storage facility in Denver. I'm going there." "Claire, no," Mark said firmly. "If this guy is as dangerous as he sounds, you can't go after him alone. Let me send a team." But Claire had already made up her mind. "I'll be careful," she said, ending the call before he could argue further. The drive to Denver was long and tense. Claire's mind raced with questions and fears, but she clung to the hope that this lead would bring her closer to Ethan. She arrived at the storage facility late at night, the sprawling complex bathed in the eerie glow of flickering fluorescent lights. The place was nearly deserted, with only a single security guard sitting in a booth near the entrance. Claire parked her car and approached him, clutching the notebook tightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I'm looking for someone who might have rented a unit here a few years ago. His name is Richard Hale, or he might have used an alias." The guard frowned, clearly suspicious. "We don't give out information about our clients," he said. Claire hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed him a picture of Ethan. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "My son disappeared 14 years ago. I think this place might be connected to what happened to him. I just need to know if there's anything here that could help me find him." The guard's expression softened. He sighed and gestured for her to follow him into the office. "I can't promise anything," he said, typing into the computer, "but I'll check." After a few minutes, he nodded. "There was a unit rented under the name Rick Hale. It's been abandoned for years, but it's still here. Unit 47. Claire's heart raced. "Can you take me there?" The guard hesitated, then grabbed a flashlight and led her through the maze of storage units. The air was cold and damp, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. When they reached Unit 47, the guard unlocked the door and stepped back. "Be careful," he said. Claire pushed the door open, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The unit was small and cluttered, filled with boxes, old furniture, and random items, but as she moved deeper inside, she saw something that made her blood run cold. On the far wall, pinned to a corkboard, were dozens of photos, Photos of children. Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the images, her eyes landing on one that made her knees buckle. It was Ethan. The photo was old, taken on the day he disappeared. He was smiling, holding his foam finger, completely unaware of the danger that had been watching him. Claire's hands shook as she pulled the photo from the board. Beneath it was a map marked with red pins. Each pin represented a location, and next to each one was a date. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where he's been." But before she could examine the map further, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around, her flashlight illuminating the doorway. A man stood there, his face hidden in the shadows. "Looking for something?" he said, his voice calm and cold. Claire's heart stopped. She knew, without a doubt, that this was the shepherd. The man stepped into the light, his face eerily calm. He was older than she had expected, with grey hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, as if he were sizing her up. "You've been busy," he said, gesturing to the notebook in her hand. Richard always was, a little too nosy for his own good. Claire's grip tightened on the flashlight. "Where is my son?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The shepherd tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Your son?" he said. "Ah, yes, Ethan. I remember him, such a bright boy." Claire's blood boiled. "Where is he?" she shouted. The shepherd's smile faded. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said. "But you're in over your head. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before Claire could respond, he lunged at her. She swung the flashlight, hitting him in the shoulder, and ran for the door. Her heart pounded as she sprinted through the maze of storage units, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind her. She reached the security booth and banged on the door. "Call the police!" she shouted. The guard grabbed the phone, but before he could dial, the shepherd appeared, his face twisted with rage. Claire grabbed a heavy object from the desk and swung it at him, knocking him to the ground. The guard tackled him, pinning him down as sirens wailed in the distance. When the police arrived, Claire handed them the notebook and the map. "He knows where they are," she said, her voice trembling. "He knows where my son is." As the shepherd was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Claire, his eyes cold and unrepentant. "You'll never find him," he said. "Not without me." But Claire wasn't giving up. She had come too far, and she wasn't stopping now. The police station was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the grey walls. Claire sat in a small interrogation room, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared at the one-way mirror. On the other side of the glass, the shepherd sat calmly, his hands cuffed to the table. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if he was still in control. Detective Mark Hensley entered the room, his face lined with exhaustion. He placed a cup of coffee in front of Claire and sat down across. "From her." "We've got him," Mark said, his voice low. "But he's not talking. He's refusing to say anything about Ethan or the other children. He's playing games, Claire." Claire's jaw tightened. "He knows where Ethan is," she said firmly. "I saw it in his eyes. He's taunting us because he thinks we'll give up. But I won't. I can't." Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're going through the evidence you found in the storage unit. The photos, the map, it's all being analyzed. But it's going to take time, and we don't have much of that. If he decides to lawyer up, we could lose our chance to get anything out of him." Claire's mind raced. She couldn't let this slip away. 14 years of pain, of unanswered questions, had led to this moment. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Let me talk to him," she said. Mark's eyes widened. "Absolutely not. Claire, he's dangerous. He's manipulative. He'll twist your words and use them against you." "I don't care," Claire said, her voice steady. "He took my son. I need to look him in the eye and make him tell me where Ethan is. Please, Mark, I have to do this." Mark hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I'll be watching." From the other side of the glass. The moment I think he's trying to manipulate you, I'm pulling you out. Claire nodded, her heart pounding as she followed Mark to the interrogation room. The door creaked open and the shepherd looked up, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, the mother," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "I was wondering when you'd come to see me." Claire sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the photo of Ethan on the table. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the fear bubbling inside her. The shepherd leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to the photo. "Ethan," he said slowly, as if savoring the name. "Such a bright boy. He reminded me of someone I used to know." "Stop playing games," Claire snapped. "You've been watching him. You've been watching all of them. Why? What did you do to my son?" The shepherd's smile widened. "You think I'm the monster, don't you?" he said. "But I didn't take your son, Claire. I saved him." Claire froze, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about?" The shepherd leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know what happens to children like Ethan? The ones who are too bright, too curious, too special. They get noticed by people far worse than me. I took him to protect him." Claire's stomach churned. Protect him from what? The shepherd's eyes darkened. "There's a network," he said. "A group of people who prey on children. They're powerful, connected, untouchable. I've been tracking them for years, trying to stop them. Ethan was on their list. I took him before they could." Claire's hands clenched into fists. "If you were protecting him, then where is he? Why didn't you bring him back to me?" The shepherd hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. "Because I couldn't," he said quietly. "Once you're in their sights, you're never truly safe. I had to keep him hidden. I had to make sure they couldn't find him." Claire's heart ached with a mixture of hope and anger. "You're lying," she said. "You're just trying to justify what you did. If you really cared about Ethan, you'd tell me where he is." The shepherd looked up, his eyes filled with something Claire couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps, or guilt. "He's alive," he said. "That's all you need to know." "No," Claire said, her voice breaking. "That's not enough. I need to see him. I need to know he's okay." The shepherd leaned back, his expression unreadable. "There's a cabin," he said finally, "in the mountains, near Boulder. That's where I left him. But if you go there, you'll be putting him in danger. They're still watching, Claire. They're always watching." Claire didn't wait for permission. As soon as she had the location, she was in her car, driving toward the mountains. Mark had tried to stop her, insisting that the police needed to secure the area first, but she couldn't wait. Every second felt like an eternity, and she couldn't shake the fear that she was already too late. The road to the cabin was treacherous, winding through dense forests and steep cliffs. Claire's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the narrow path, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. When she finally reached the cabin, it was nearly dusk. The small wooden structure was nestled among the trees, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. Claire stepped out of the car, her legs trembling as she approached the cabin. "Ethan?" she called, her voice echoing in the silence. There was no response. She pushed the door open, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped inside. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and well kept. On the table, she saw a stack of books, a baseball glove, and a photo of a young boy, her son. Tears streamed down her face as she picked up the photo, her fingers trembling. "Ethan," she whispered. A noise behind her made her spin around. Standing in the doorway was a young man, his blonde hair messy and his blue eyes wide with shock. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. Claire's heart stopped. "Ethan." He nodded, tears filling his eyes as he stepped toward her. "It's me," he said. "It's really me." Claire pulled him into her arms, sobbing as she held him close. 14 years of pain and longing melted away in that moment, replaced by a joy so overwhelming it felt like a dream. But as they embraced, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The shepherd's warning echoed in her mind. They're still watching. For now, she had her son back, but the fight wasn't over.